I'd owned Blue for 3 years when she saved everything I had. She was a purebred Australian cattle dog, what most folks call a blue heeler, and she took her job seriously. Every morning she'd patrol the property, checking fence lines and watching for anything unusual. Every evening she'd settle on the porch, keeping watch while I finished chores. We had a rhythm, Blue and I, the kind of partnership that develops between working dogs and the people who depend on them. That particular evening started like any other. October in Nebraska means early sunsets and cooling temperatures, perfect weather for finishing harvest preparations. I'd spent the day servicing equipment, checking grain bins, and preparing for the wheat delivery, scheduled for the following week. My family had farmed this land for 3 generations, 600 acres of wheat, corn, and soybeans that represented everything we'd built. Blue had been with me all day, as always. She'd followed the tractor, investigated every corner of every barn, and generally made herself useful in the way good farm dogs do. By evening, she should have been tired, ready to settle down for the night. Instead, she was agitated. It started around 7. I'd come inside to make dinner, leaving Blue on the porch as usual. Within minutes, I heard her scratching at the door. Not the normal scratch requesting entry, but frantic, insistent scratching accompanied by low whining. I opened the door, expecting her to come inside. Instead, she backed away, staring at me with intense focus, then looked toward the far end of the property where the grain silos stood. I told her to settle down, assuming she'd spotted a coyote or deer. Blue wasn't easily spooked, but occasionally wildlife would trigger her protective instincts. She ignored my command completely, continuing to scratch and whine, her entire body tense with urgency I'd never seen before. Blue's behavior became increasingly frantic. She'd scratch the door, back away when I opened it, then run several feet toward the silos before returning. Her message was clear. She wanted me to follow. But I had dinner cooking, paperwork to finish, and no patience for chasing shadows across the property in fading light. I tried bringing her inside, thinking she was cold or anxious about something trivial. She refused to enter, planting herself at the door and staring at me with such intensity that I finally started feeling uneasy. This wasn't normal behavior. Blue was smart, focused, and she didn't waste energy on nonsense. If she was this agitated, something was genuinely wrong. I turned off the stove and grabbed my jacket. The moment I stepped onto the porch, Blue took off running toward the silos, stopped halfway across the yard, and looked back to ensure I was following. I called her back, but she ignored me completely. This was unprecedented. Blue always obeyed commands instantly. Her disobedience alarmed me more than her agitation. I grabbed a flashlight and started walking toward where she'd run. The sun had dropped below the horizon, leaving that strange twilight when details become harder to distinguish. Blue stayed ahead of me, occasionally circling back with obvious impatience at my slow pace. She was leading me somewhere specific, with purpose that overrode her usual obedience. As I walked across the yard toward the equipment barn, I tried to identify what might have triggered her behavior. The property seemed completely normal. No unusual vehicles, no signs of intruders, nothing obviously wrong. Yet Blue's urgency suggested imminent danger, not mere curiosity. Then, about 200 yards from the house, I heard it. A soft, crackling sound, barely audible, coming from the direction of the grain silos. I stopped walking, straining to identify the noise. It was faint, irregular, and shouldn't have been there at all. The crackling grew slightly louder as I approached, accompanied now by a smell I initially couldn't identify. Blue had stopped running and stood rigid, her entire body pointing toward the larger of the 2 silos like a compass needle finding north. The hair along her spine stood up, and she'd begun a low, continuous growl I'd never heard from her before. I quickened my pace, the flashlight beam sweeping across the yard toward the silos. Everything looked normal from a distance. 2 massive steel structures standing against the darkening sky, filled with last year's wheat waiting to be sold. Then my flashlight caught something that made my blood run cold. Smoke, thin wisps of grey smoke seeping from vents near the base of the larger silo. I started running. Grain dust explosions were every farmer's nightmare. Under the right conditions, accumulated dust in confined spaces could ignite and explode with devastating force. The resulting blast could destroy buildings, kill anyone nearby, and trigger chain reactions that leveled entire farm operations. I'd heard stories my entire life about farmers losing everything in seconds when grain dust ignited. As I got closer, the crackling became clearer. It was the sound of fire, small but growing, somewhere inside the silo structure. The smell I'd noticed earlier was smoke mixed with burning grain. How long had this been happening? How much time did I have before it reached explosive conditions? Blue stayed with me, but maintained distance from the silo, her instincts warning her about danger she couldn't see. I circled the structure quickly, trying to assess the situation. The smoke was coming from the lower access panel, where electrical connections fed the auger system that moved grain in and out. An electrical fire, most likely, smoldering inside the silo where oxygen was limited, but grain dust was abundant. I had minutes, maybe less, before this became catastrophic. I ran back toward the house, my mind racing through everything that needed to happen immediately. First, call the fire department. Second, shut off all power to the silos. Third, try to prevent the fire from reaching the main grain storage area where the explosion risk was highest. Every second counted, and I was acutely aware that one mistake could cost me everything. I burst through the house door and grabbed my phone, dialing 911 while running to the electrical panel in the garage. The dispatcher answered, and I forced myself to speak clearly despite my panic. Grain silo fire, electrical origin, high explosion risk. I gave the address and emphasized the urgency. She assured me trucks were dispatched and advised me to evacuate immediately. I couldn't evacuate. If that fire reached the main grain mass before firefighters arrived, the explosion would be massive. I had to do something, anything, to slow its progression. I threw the main breaker for the silos, killing all electrical power to the area. That would stop the fire's source, but not extinguish what was already burning. I grabbed fire extinguishers from the garage and the barn, collecting 4 of them. They wouldn't be enough to fight a major fire, but they might suppress flames long enough for professional help to arrive. I sprinted back toward the silos, Blue running beside me, both of us racing against time and chemistry. The smoke had thickened noticeably in the few minutes I'd been gone. The crackling was louder, more persistent. I approached the access panel carefully, hyper-aware that opening it might introduce enough oxygen to accelerate the fire dramatically. But I had to see what I was dealing with. I slowly opened the panel, keeping the fire extinguisher ready. Smoke poured out immediately, along with visible flames burning along electrical wiring and beginning to spread to grain dust accumulated in corners and crevices. I discharged the first extinguisher directly at the flames, watching white chemical foam cover the burning wires. The fire diminished, but didn't extinguish completely. Grain dust had ignited in multiple locations, fed by smoldering materials I couldn't see. I grabbed the second extinguisher, spraying systematically at every visible flame, trying to create a barrier between the fire and the main grain storage. Blue barked frantically from a safe distance, her warning consistent and urgent. I could hear sirens now, still distant but approaching. I continued spraying, working through the second extinguisher and starting on the third. The fire was responding, shrinking under the chemical assault, but I knew I was only treating symptoms. Somewhere deeper in the structure, the original fire source continued burning. The heat intensified as I worked, and smoke made breathing difficult. I tied my shirt over my nose and mouth, squinting through stinging eyes, determined to hold the line until professional firefighters arrived. If this fire reached the main grain mass, if the conditions became right for a dust explosion, we'd all be in danger. I thought about my grandfather building these silos 40 years ago, about my father maintaining them meticulously, about the 3 generations of work they represented. I thought about harvest seasons, about grain prices and weather worries, about the endless cycle of planting and hoping and reaping. Everything my family had built could vanish in one explosive moment. The third extinguisher emptied, and I grabbed the fourth. The flames were smaller now, reduced to smoldering patches and isolated flare-ups. I'd bought time, but not safety. I needed the fire department's equipment, their expertise, their ability to thoroughly extinguish what I could only suppress. The sirens grew louder. Flashing lights appeared on the access road. Relief flooded through me, though I didn't stop spraying until professional firefighters took over. 3 fire trucks arrived within minutes of each other, along with the county fire marshal and emergency medical responders. Firefighters moved with practiced efficiency, running hoses from the trucks to the silo, donning protective equipment and establishing a perimeter. The fire marshal approached me quickly, asking for details about the silo's contents, construction, and the fire's progression. I explained everything I knew, the grain type and quantity, the electrical system layout when I discovered the fire, and what suppression actions I'd taken. He nodded approvingly at my decision to cut power immediately and use extinguishers cautiously. Then he ordered me to evacuate to a safe distance while his crew worked. I retreated to the house with Blue, watching from the porch as firefighters battled the blaze. They used specialized techniques for grain fires, introducing carbon dioxide to displace oxygen without creating explosive conditions. They monitored temperature constantly, watching for hotspots that might indicate deeper burning. The operation was methodical and professional, everything I couldn't have done alone. It took them 3 hours to fully extinguish the fire and confirm the silo was safe. During that time, neighbors arrived, drawn by the emergency lights and concerned about our situation. Rural communities take care of their own, and several offered equipment, storage space, or whatever else we might need. Their support reminded me why I loved farming despite its challenges. The fire marshal finally approached the house around midnight. He looked tired but satisfied. The fire was completely out, the silo structure was intact, and we'd avoided the catastrophic explosion that had seemed imminent earlier. He estimated we'd lost about 20% of the stored grain to fire and water damage, but the remaining 80% was safe. Then he said something that made me realize how close we'd come to disaster. Based on the fire's progression and the dust conditions inside the silo, we'd been approximately 15 minutes from explosive conditions when firefighters arrived. The fire marshal explained that the fire had started from faulty wiring in the auger motor, probably shorting out due to age and wear. The motor had smoldered for hours, slowly heating grain dust that had accumulated around it. If I hadn't discovered it when I did, the fire would have reached the main grain mass, where conditions were perfect for a dust explosion. He asked how I detected the fire so early. The smoke had been minimal, barely visible. The sound had been quiet, unlikely to carry to the house. Most farmers wouldn't have noticed until flames were visible or smoke was pouring from the structure. By then, it would have been too late to prevent catastrophic damage. I pointed to Blue, still sitting alertly on the porch. She'd been watching the entire operation, never leaving her post, maintaining vigilance even after the danger passed. I explained her frantic behavior, how she'd refused to settle, how she'd insisted I follow her despite my initial resistance. Without her persistence, I would have discovered the fire much later, if at all. The fire marshal looked at Blue with obvious respect. He mentioned that he'd seen similar stories throughout his career, animals detecting dangers humans missed, acting on instincts we'd long since dulled. Dogs especially seemed attuned to subtle changes in their environment, noticing smoke, heat, or sounds that people overlooked. He estimated that Blue's early warning had saved me at least $500,000 in property damage, possibly more when considering the chain reaction an exploding silo might have triggered. The second silo, standing nearby, would likely have been destroyed as well. The barn, only 200 yards away, might have caught fire from debris. The house itself could have been damaged. Blue had quite literally saved everything. My property, my livelihood, possibly my life, all because she'd noticed something wrong and refused to let me ignore it. After the fire marshal left and neighbors departed, I sat on the porch with Blue. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by exhaustion and profound gratitude. Blue, curled up beside me, finally relaxed now that the danger had passed. I ran my hand over her head, feeling the soft fur and the solid loyalty underneath. I thought about how easily I'd dismissed her initial warnings, how close I'd come to ignoring her completely. If I'd been more stubborn, if I'd refused to investigate, the outcome would have been devastating. My impatience with her scratching could have cost me everything my family had built over 3 generations. Working dogs develop bonds with their people that go beyond simple training or obedience. Blue knew this farm as well as I did. She understood its rhythms, its normal sounds and smells, its baseline state. When something disrupted that baseline, her instincts recognized danger even when her human partner remained oblivious. I'd always valued Blue for her work ethic and companionship. Now I understood she was something more, a guardian whose senses and instincts compensated for human limitations. Her role went beyond herding cattle or patrolling for predators. She was an early warning system, a protector whose vigilance never wavered. The next morning, I called my insurance agent to report the fire. He was shocked by how close we'd come to total loss. When I explained Blue's role in the early detection, he asked if I'd considered getting her certified as a working farm dog for insurance purposes. Apparently, some policies offered discounts for properties with trained safety dogs. I called the local veterinarian to schedule a complete health check for Blue. She deserved the best care I could provide. The vet, Dr. Sarah Chen, had known Blue since she was a puppy. When I described the previous night's events, she smiled knowingly. Dr. Chen explained that Australian cattle dogs were bred for intelligence, independence, and problem-solving. They were working dogs in the truest sense, capable of assessing situations and taking initiative when necessary. Blue's behavior during the fire was textbook for the breed. She'd identified a problem, attempted to communicate it to her handler, and persisted despite initial dismissal. She mentioned that Blue's acute sense of smell probably detected the fire long before I noticed any visual signs. Dogs could smell smoke at concentrations far below human detection thresholds. Additionally, they heard frequencies humans couldn't perceive. The crackling I'd barely heard was probably much louder to Blue's ears. Dr. Chen suggested documenting the incident for farming publications. Stories about working dogs saving properties or lives helped educate people about their value. Too many farmers viewed dogs as mere companions rather than essential safety equipment. Blue's story could change minds and potentially save other operations from similar disasters. Over the following weeks, word spread through the farming community. Local newspapers ran stories about Blue's heroic vigilance. A regional farming magazine featured us in their safety section. The Blue Heeler Breed Association contacted me, asking permission to include Blue's story in their promotional materials, demonstrating the breed's working capabilities. The attention felt excessive for something that seemed straightforward to me. Blue had simply done what good dogs do. She'd noticed danger and alerted her person, but I understood why others found it remarkable. In an age of increasing farm automation and decreasing personal attention to details, Blue represented something valuable that technology couldn't replace. I received messages from farmers across the country sharing their own stories of dogs detecting problems. One man described his German Shepherd alerting him to a gas leak. Another told of a border collie noticing an injured calf hidden in tall grass. Each story reinforced the same truth. Working dogs provided value far beyond their obvious roles. The insurance inspection happened 2 weeks after the fire. The adjuster, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, who'd grown up on a farm, examined the damaged silo thoroughly. She photographed everything, interviewed me extensively, and reviewed the fire marshal's official report. Her assessment confirmed what we already knew. Blue's early warning had prevented a catastrophic total loss. Patricia mentioned that her company was developing new guidelines for farm safety programs. They were considering incentives for farmers who maintained working dogs, installed certain monitoring equipment, and completed regular safety training. My case would be cited as an example of why these programs mattered. The settlement check arrived a month later. It covered the lost grain, the silo repairs, and even compensated me for the fire extinguishers I'd exhausted. More importantly, my premium didn't increase despite the claim. Patricia had noted in her report that my immediate response and effective fire suppression had minimized damage substantially. Blue's early warning was specifically mentioned as a mitigating factor. I used part of the settlement to upgrade the electrical systems on all farm structures. The electrician I hired found several other potential problems in aging wiring systems. We replaced everything questionable, installed better circuit breakers, and improved the overall safety infrastructure. The fire had been a warning about deferred maintenance, a lesson I took seriously. I also invested in Blue's continued training. While she was already an excellent working dog, I wanted to formalize her safety alert behaviors. I contacted a trainer who specialized in scent detection and disaster response. Over several months, Blue learned to systematically check buildings for smoke, gas, or other hazards on command. The training revealed capabilities I hadn't realized she possessed. Blue could detect propane leaks, identify overheating electrical equipment, and even notice structural problems by changes in sound or vibration. She became not just a working dog, but a comprehensive farm safety system. Blue's reputation spread beyond our immediate community. I received invitations to speak at farming conferences about working dog safety programs. Initially reluctant to speak publicly, I eventually agreed, believing the message was important. Blue accompanied me to these events, demonstrating her capabilities and charming audiences with her intelligence and focus. At one conference in Iowa, I met a young farmer named Michael who'd recently lost his entire operation to a fire that could have been prevented with early detection. He stood in line for 30 minutes to talk with me afterward. He wanted to know about Blue's breed, her training, her daily routine. 6 months later, he contacted me to report that he'd adopted a Blue Heeler puppy and begun working dog training. These conversations repeated themselves across multiple states and farming communities. Blue's story resonated because it was fundamentally about paying attention, about trusting the instincts of those who work beside us, about recognizing that safety comes from vigilance rather than luck. Every farmer understood how quickly disaster could strike, how thin the margin was between successful harvest and catastrophic loss. I began documenting Blue's daily routine more carefully, noting the patterns and behaviors that made her an effective guardian. I shared this information through blog posts and social media, building a small following of farmers interested in working dog programs. The response was overwhelming. People wanted to learn, to improve, to protect their operations more effectively. One particularly meaningful message came from an elderly farmer in Kansas. He wrote that he'd always kept dogs, but never really understood their potential beyond companionship. After reading about Blue, he'd started paying closer attention to his own dog's behaviors. That attention led him to discover a dangerous carbon monoxide leak in his equipment shed that could have killed him. Blue's influence extended beyond individual farms. Agricultural safety organizations began incorporating working dog programs into their educational materials. The following harvest season arrived with new awareness and gratitude. Every morning, when Blue began her property patrol, I watched more carefully, noting what she checked and how she assessed normalcy. I learned to read her body language more accurately, distinguishing between casual interest and genuine concern. Our communication improved dramatically, built on mutual understanding and trust. The repaired silo was put back into service with upgraded safety systems. Better electrical components, improved ventilation, regular monitoring equipment. But I knew that no technology could replace Blue's vigilant presence. Machines detected only what they were programmed to find. Blue detected anything that shouldn't be there, anything that disrupted the farm's normal state. I began teaching younger farmers about working dog programs, emphasizing that these weren't pet projects, but serious safety investments. I explained the economics. A well-trained working dog cost less than most safety equipment while providing capabilities no machine could match. Insurance companies increasingly recognized this value, offering tangible incentives for documented working dog programs. Blue became something of a local celebrity, recognized in town and greeted enthusiastically by people who'd heard her story. Children asked to pet the dog who'd saved a farm. Adults asked about training methods and breed selection. She handled attention with typical cattle dog tolerance, accepting but not particularly interested in praise, more focused on watching her surroundings than soaking up admiration. I realized that the fire had given me something beyond property preservation. It had deepened my relationship with Blue, transformed my understanding of working dog partnerships, and connected me with a community of farmers who valued the same principles. The near disaster had become a catalyst for positive change. My father, who'd farmed this land before retiring, visited regularly. He'd always liked Blue, but admitted he'd viewed her primarily as companionship for me. After learning the full story, his perspective changed. He confessed that his generation had lost sight of working dogs' practical value, treating them as luxuries rather than necessities. Now, 2 years after the fire, Blue is 5 years old and at the peak of her working ability. She still patrols every morning, checks every building, and maintains constant awareness of the farm's condition. I trust her instincts completely, knowing that her senses and intelligence provide protection I couldn't achieve alone. The damaged silo stands fully repaired, filled again with grain, operating safely. Every time I look at it, I remember that October evening when everything could have ended. I remember Blue's frantic scratching, her persistent refusal to be ignored, her determination to make me understand. I remember the crackling sound near the silos and the smoke seeping from vents. I've had several young Blue healers over the years, but Blue remains irreplaceable. She's not just a working dog or a safety system. She's a partner who saved everything I have, who demonstrated loyalty and intelligence when it mattered most. The bond we share now goes beyond training or obedience. It's built on trust, gratitude, and mutual respect. I've learned to listen more carefully to those who work beside me, whether they communicate with words or actions. I've learned that intelligence comes in many forms, that instincts developed over thousands of years of breeding shouldn't be dismissed. That partnership means valuing all perspectives. Blue's story continues to influence farmers across the country. Working dog programs have expanded. Safety training now includes animal behavior awareness, and insurance companies actively promote these approaches. The ripple effect from one dog's vigilance on one October evening continues growing. Every evening, Blue settles on the porch to keep watch while I finish chores. The rhythm we established years ago continues, but now I understand its depth. She's not just keeping me company. She's standing guard, monitoring, ensuring that everything remains as it should be. Some might say I'm lucky that Blue noticed the fire in time, but luck implies randomness, chance, accident. What happened wasn't luck. It was the result of a working partnership built on trust, training, and mutual attention.